welcome to this episode of Thrive Alive. I'm LaDawn Jenkins, and I'm sitting in for Nurse Jasmine. So we wanted to bring an episode to you to talk about mental health from a slightly different lens, and that would be from the lens of the Black woman. I want to leave you with something or give you something to think about. What if your community, what is the thing that your community calls your greatest strength is actually making you sick? Sit with that for a minute. And we're going to unpack what does that actually mean for the woman, particularly the Black woman. Because this is not something that is talked about in the homes. It's not talked about in the churches. It's not even talked about at the doctor's office. And so when we talk about mental health in women, and particularly Black women, there's just some things that I think are wrapped around what that could look like, and particularly for Black women. And so let's get into that. But before we do that, I want to welcome our guests. Joining us at the table today is Amanda Senor Elliott, a licensed clinical counselor here at Rush, as well as Amber Smith, a licensed clinical social worker. They're both with the Trauma and Recovery Center here at Rush. So ladies, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get into it for a moment. So I do have some thoughts about why this is really important, okay? And so first of all, when we hear the word or the term strong Black woman, where does that come from? What does that mean and where does it come from?
It's a really good question. I think it actually has historical roots, even rooted back in slavery, right? Mm-hmm. So Black people and Black women specifically were deemed mentally and also physically strong in order to impose, right, harm and extract their labor. Right, so this doesn't come out of a vacuum, right? There was actually some real negative connotations around what it meant to be a strong individual. But I think over time, Black women, fortunately, and we'll get into it a little bit later, but I think fortunately have redefined what it means to be a strong Black woman as a source of strength, as a source of pride, and as a source of community. When we look back, even in the times of like old Hollywood, like the Mammy figure, the Jezebel, the welfare queen, right, back in the 80s and early 90s, right? These all served a very specific function, and it was to dehumanize women, right? To devoid them of the complexities that we know humans carry of all sorts, right? And so although it served a very racist function, if I want to be frank about it, I think in current times when we look at what it means to be a strong Black woman, it has been transformed.
So that is not something that the woman chose.
Absolutely. Yes.
This was something that was kind of put upon Black women.
I would argue that we think, right, we choose it, but it is actually something that has been imposed and something that we have learned to adapt to this system of oppression by adopting, right, this term in order to protect ourselves, in order to, right, continue to sustain the families and responsibilities and all of these things that we're still expected to in the midst of dismantling of families and exploitation of labor and all of these other things that we've had to experience, right? In order to survive, we had to create this skill of remaining strong and adopting, right, this term.
That's interesting. Has there been any research done around this term or this, what should we call this?
Yeah, we can call it a term or a schema even, right? I think about what I was referencing earlier around this shift between this term being used in a negative function. Patricia Hill Collins, who's a sociologist, talks about this a lot, and she frames this as a controlling image, right? Something that may appear neutral, but it actually has real harm and real negative implications when we use it.
So how does this show up in our bodies and in our minds?
Yeah, absolutely. So there has been a study done that Black women do have a stronger, right, endorsement for things like depression, anxiety, feelings of right, sadness. There has been that. And then these things also show up in a physical sense because due to this trope, right, this strong Black woman asking for help is seen as a weakness, right? And then, right, using Black woman and weakness in the same sentence is like an oxymoron, right? So these are things that we stay away from. So when it's seen as a weakness, when asking help for it is seen as a weakness, we delay support, right? So we delay getting therapy, we delay getting medical help, right? We may delay even just telling someone about it. And when we're delaying these things, right, it shows up in our physical health, right? Hypertension, stress, all of these things, in addition to those mental health things.
So can strength and suffering exist at the same time?
Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive. And I think that's one misconception that we often have as a community, but also as a society, right? When we talk about, right, strength, right, in the absence of need. And I don't necessarily want to position this conversation, I don't think you are, but I don't want to position this conversation to mean that we need to get rid of or dismantle strength. The true danger and the true risk that Black women face is that not strength itself, but the denial of need is truly the concern here, right? When we are, as Amber mentioned, right, we are socialized to believe that we are weaker or that there's something wrong with us when we are in need of support. That is just a human experience. And I think that's something that's really important to, to enforce and reiterate.
That made me think of something. And this was maybe a while ago. You would hear people say, especially from the medical community, that, Black women could handle more pain, right, than other people. And I wondered, where did that come from? Is that because we just try to hold it together all the time?
Yeah.
And so we, to your point, push away our feelings,
Yeah.
Because we have to hold it together for our family, for our community, for everybody else. We're upholding everybody else. So we can't afford.
Absolutely.
And are there excuse me, some things have been passed down to us?
Absolutely, right. It's essentially kind of like a cycle, right? Because that whole thought of Black women can handle more pain or endure more pain, that's rooted in racism, right? Like, we understand now the flaws in that thought, right? And the medical community has, attempted to dismantle it, right? But like you said, it still has some lasting effects where this is still a thought. And the thing is, because we have adopted this schema of being the strong Black woman and we do delay care, unfortunately, we perpetuate this cycle, right? Because providers may think we're stronger. We can handle more because we are reporting less. So unfortunately, right, it perpetuates this thought of, see, they can handle more, but that's simply just not true.
Yeah.
This public health researcher, Dr. Arlene Geronimo, she did a study way back in the 90s where she coined the term weathering. And I think back then, it was questioned. And I think now we actually look at that a lot closer, right? So weathering is the concept in a general sense, right? The wear and tear on the body. And what she found, and I was actually really fascinated when I saw this too, back in 2006, I think she expanded on her research. And what she found was that Black women, when she measured their allostatic load, again, the wear and tear on the body, right, the cardiovascular strain, the increased cortisol, that Black women carry an allostatic load that is comparable to a 60-year-old white woman. So a 40-year-old Black woman has a load comparable to a 60-year-old Black woman. We are actually aging, right, advanced aging compared to our counterparts. And it is because of the undue racism, stress, these systemic barriers that we constantly face, right, as a community, but especially Black women.
So how do we protect ourselves from this?
Yeah. And I think that's a really important question, right? Because it's real easy to say, just ask for help, right? But we just explain the reasons why it may be socially or just interpersonally, why it may be difficult to ask for help. I think the first step is not actually therapy, right? I have the temptation to say, go to therapy, right? But that's usually a more down the line step. That's an advanced step. I think the first step is actually naming it for yourself. right? Being able to sit with yourself and say, I'm not okay, and not rush into fixing or doing, right? Because that's another like subset or a symptom of being strong. I have to have an answer for this.
Sure.
Actually, I'm asking you to put that down and just name to yourself, are you okay? Are you all right, girl? Check in with yourself, journal, send voice notes. I'm guilty of this. I do this all the time where I may record myself in the moment and then I reflect back on it later, or maybe I decide to delete it later. But being able to have a private conversation with self before we go to anyone else, to actually name and say, I'm not okay. That can be transformative even in itself.
And I think that's important that you said that, because it is okay not to be okay, right? And it's probably like any other issue or condition that if we don't acknowledge what it is, we can't address it, right? And so I think feeling the notion that you have to carry that load, right? So when you think about this, is the weight of being strong, right? You're carrying the load, you put everything else aside, you don't admit that there's an issue, which to me makes sense why there's such a impact on our mental stability, or not stability, but how it impacts us mentally, right? We'd say depression or anxiety or isolation or loneliness, all those things, because we're carrying such a heavy load. Right.
Suppressing it, right? It's a temporary fix, right? It allows us to keep going, right, in those moments. However, when we're by ourselves, right, when we're not doing something, right, what are we thinking about? Are we able to sit in that discomfort, right? And like Amanda said, acknowledge that we're not okay, right? The first step is acknowledging it. We don't know it's a problem until we're able to say that this is right. Something's going on right now, and I need to figure out what it is. Right, I can't keep running away from it. I can't keep pushing it down, because pushing it down doesn't fix it. It doesn't allow us to process it. It doesn't allow us to work on it. It just stays there, and when something just stays, it festers and it grows and it grows. Right, and now we have mental health, right? Things that we're dealing with that also leads to physical health as well. It's all connected.
You were about to say?
Well, I just wanted to add, I also, in addition to what we're talking about in terms of naming it first, I also think about lowering the barrier of what it means to ask for help, right? So sometimes we think, right, if I acknowledge that I need help, that must mean that I need to go see a psychiatrist or I must go to therapy. And that may be true for some women, right? But I also think about, what about just saying no without a long explanation? Right, or declining an invite to something, or allowing someone else to step in and supporting you, right? Hey, honey, can you cook dinner tonight? Right, kind of making those small receiving care is also asking for help too.
Yeah, but you mentioned therapy.
Of course.
And I think it's hard if that has not been how you have operated, right, to ask for help, to even be able to make those small shifts without someone helping you kind of see what that looks like. So what would that look like in therapy?
Yeah. I think therapy is so important because as we've been naming, right, Black women in general, but especially Black women, we are positioned and socialized to be caretakers for everybody else, to be containers for everybody else, to be the support for everyone else. Where therapy is the exact opposite. It's all about you in that room. And it's the one opportunity where you can turn off all of the external noise, or at least we're going to try to help you, right, find tools to turn out that external noise and really it be about you. And you get to take up that whole hour for yourself. And if that's the only hour in the day, that matters too, because a lot of women, they don't get that hour.
Right.
And in therapy, right, the expectation isn't strength. You don't have to be the strongest woman when you walk into my room, right? Like, you don't have to, you can leave all of that at the door. Everything that you've been carrying, right? Like, you can leave it all at the door. And like Amanda said, this is the time for you, right? If there's no other time where you're able to let your hair down and express yourself and cry or acknowledge, right, the things that are going on. If there's no other time for that, therapy, right, is a safe space for that. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's important what you just said. we need to recognize that's a safe space,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if you're not used to having these conversations, you're afraid to have these conversations.
Yeah.
Because I think you also need to understand, what does that mean
Yeah.
for me
Yeah.
if I'm not the strongest person, right?
Yeah.
If people are not always coming to me. And I remember a talk in the community once where a person stood up and said her whole family looks to her for everything. But she didn't know how to tell them no. And she was almost afraid to tell them no, even though it had become a real burden on her. And I think she was trying to find out, what can I do? How do I make this pivot from being the person everyone comes to and expects to solve whatever issue and problem that is happening?
Yeah.
And no one ever turns to her and says, do you need any help?
Of course. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's how, what you're naming too is like, it's not just a mindset shift or sort of a shift in the way that we think about or redefine strength. I think what you're also naming is a real identity shift. What does it mean to me where I am no longer inhabiting, right, the strong role or the role where everyone comes to me? What might that say about me? We know what our community and sometimes our society teaches us, there's something wrong with you, right? You're not performing as what it means to be a woman or a strong Black woman, right? What does that then do internally where we then confront and say, I don't want to hold this anymore, or I can't hold this right now, right? Therapy, and I think Amber and I, we are really, really delicate in when we have these conversations with amongst other women where we let them know that, one, it's okay. And it's not an all or nothing. You can put the bags down for just a moment, right, and get to catch your breath. And if you want to pick them back up, then you can go right ahead, right? But there's a real shift, I think, that's starting to happen even in our current day and in the way that we're having conversations. And I think this podcast is also one of those ways that we're having those shifts.
Wonderful. Are you seeing the shift across generations?
I believe so.
Like, the Gen Zs, versus the what's the baby boomers, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The millennials, what are you seeing?
Definitely a shift, right? That historical and intergenerational trauma that we was kind of describing earlier that is stemmed from our ancestors, right? Like the newer generations, they're ready to disentangle themselves from it, right? Like we're tired, right? And we're acknowledging that we're tired, and we're saying that it's okay to be tired, right? And that I would be tired too if I was carrying the world, right? So being able to acknowledge these things, normalize it, right, as a community has done wonders, right? The destigmatization of it as well, right, has done wonders for the community. There is still a lot of work to do, absolutely. But on the clinician side, I can say that yes, I am seeing a shift happening with the newer generations and mental health, absolutely.
I think a lot about the conversation around the soft life. Right.
Yeah.
And,
The soft life.
Yeah, the soft life. Right. So, social media for all the criticisms we may have for social media, I think it has done a wonderful thing of really giving an inside look to our experiences as Black women, right? We are able to, as Amber said, normalize our experiences in a way that maybe wasn't easily or readily accessible in past times. But the soft life is sort of what Amber was referencing, right? Disentangling ourselves from the hustle culture, right? Or the need to, again, be strong or to be there for everyone. I think there's still continued conversation even amongst Gen Z compared to boomers, where maybe baby boomers may see that as unearned, right? You have to earn, right, the right to rest, or you have to earn the ability for this softness, where Gen Z is saying, no, I'm a human. I am deserved, or I am earning this just by existing. Rest is not a reward. It's actually a requirement, right, to exist in this world. So really disentangling ourselves from the hustle and bustle, right, and to need to be anywhere and everywhere and everything to everyone. Where now Gen Z are saying, maybe we want to challenge that a little bit.
I love that. I love that. And because, I think that gives us the opportunity to learn, right? We're always learning from the next generation, right?
Yeah.
And that is something that I've noticed as well. Just in general, younger people are much more about caring for their mental health,
Oh yeah.
right, than baby boomers,
Yeah.
right? They're not afraid to talk about it.
Yeah.
So hopefully they won't be as burdened with the stigma of what does it mean to be a strong woman or a strong Black woman,
Yeah.
right? And to be able to have the strength, but also be vulnerable enough, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's excellent. Thank you for that. So if a Black woman or a woman is listening to this right now and she's exhausted, she's just exhausted, what would you leave with her?
Well,
What do
Donna,
you want her to take away?
I think you said it earlier, right? That it's okay not to be okay, right? It's okay to name to yourself. If you don't name it to anyone else, you can name it to yourself and say, I'm not doing all right now. And just sitting with that again without rushing to do anything. And even what I just mentioned a second ago, that rest really isn't a reward for finishing or completing or doing something. It is a requirement to exist in this world. You really do need that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would normalize it. Like, yeah, girl, I would be exhausted too. Again, if I was carrying the weight of the world, right? Like, your exhaustion is valid. And I would also remind them that we don't have to stay there though, right? Like, we don't have to be exhausted. We can stop and take a breather and choose ourselves first, right? Like, we can't keep running towards something if we're out of breath, right? Like, we have to stop. We have to take a breather. We have to check in with ourselves, right? Rest is a requirement. And I say, right, self-care is survival, right? This isn't anything that's a choice. It isn't selfish, right? It is essential to our survival as well.
So put the oxygen on yourself first
Absolutely.
That's right.
before you can put it on anyone else.
Yes,
And if you have
yes.
nothing if you're depleted,
Exactly.
you really can't offer up anything to anyone else.
You can't pour from an empty glass.
Yeah.
There's nothing left.
Yep.
So sometimes we have to fill our own cups in whatever way
Yeah.
that looks like.
Thank you. I hope this gives women the permission.
Yeah.
The permission to be vulnerable and not feel that you have to be, the strong tower in every situation, right? Because we're not designed for that. We've been conditioned that way, right? But we're not designed to do that. And I love what you said about rest, right? Scripture even talks about rest, right? It's not a reward, it's a necessity. I love that.
Yeah.
Rest is not a reward, it's a necessity. So thank you, Amanda and Amber, for sharing at the table today around what it means to pour back into ourselves, right? To allow ourselves to be strong but also weak, and that there is not a tension there, right? It's a both and.
That's right.
Coexist.
It's a
That's
both
right.
and. You can coexist. So one final question I want to ask: are there any resources here at Rush that our audience may be interested in learning about?
Yes, Rush has a vast set of resources, specifically Amanda and myself. We are at the Center for Trauma Recovery, as LaDawn mentioned, which is a therapeutic resource that we target PTSD, trauma in patients. It is a free resource. So please look us up. We can be Googled or in the Rush directory in order to access those resources.
Now, does one have to think they have PTSD to reach out? Or could someone say, look, I just need to talk to someone? Because someone may not necessarily, they may say, I don't have PTSD, right?
Yep.
And I'm not experiencing trauma, but I could talk to someone.
Absolutely. They can contact us still, right? We welcome anyone now. They may not be a fit for our clinic. We are a specialized PTSD clinic, as Amber said, so I have to be honest about that. But we are connected also with the social work department here at Rush that can also identify other community resources, right? So I think about Therapy for Black Girls, right? Or even Psychology Today. These are directories where Black women and women of all, right, races and kind can find resources for therapy.
Okay, great. Well,
Yeah, so even if they don't know if they have PTSD, when they contact us, when they come in, we're able to do a thorough assessment, right? And if we do figure out that maybe it isn't that, then yes, we can connect them to other resources. So please still come in.
yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for offering up that resource. And thank you again. Is there a phone number? How would someone find?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. They can email us at trauma@rush.edu, or they can call our main line, which is 312-563-0575.
Trauma@rush.com.
Rush.edu.
Trauma@rush.edu. I think that's simple.
Yes.
Trauma@rush.edu.
Yep.
So thank you to the Thrive Alive podcast, and we look forward to seeing you at the next episode.
Hey Thrive Alive family, this is Jamelia. We want to hear from you about what you learned from this episode and guests that you want to see in the future. What we want you to do now is take 1 minute to fill out our Thrive Alive community survey. You can click the QR code on your screen or go to the link bit.ly/Thrive Alive survey to take our Thrive Alive community survey. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.